I heard a lot of nonsense ahead of time with Last of Us 2, but what I got was still so unexpected. The gameplay saw massive improvements across the board, and the visuals are among the best on the entire console. But the story is just straight up bad, and it takes up such an unnecessary amount of the game's real estate. Seriously, 50% of the game at least feels like it's taken up by the story and dialogue, and it goes on forever. And to make it worse, the story sucks. I'm gonna go into some heavy story spoilers, so you've been warned, but if you want to go into this game blind, then the gist of it is that, at times, this can be a legitimately good stealth action game. You just need to be extremely patient, not with the patrolling guards, but with the cutscenes, dialogue, lots of real basic puzzle solving, and plenty of walking around with nothing to do. And after all that, it's not worth it. As usual, I'll start with a plot summary. Like I said, heavy spoilers ahead. The story takes place 4 years after the first game, and it opens with Joel explaining to his brother Tommy exactly what happened between him, Ellie, and the Fireflies. And this should be your first red flag. The previous game's ending was meant to be more subdued and morally ambiguous, which is hilarious that the sequel opens up with just spelling everything out. Anyway, while Joel and Tommy are out patrolling for zombies, they come across a woman and save her from certain doom. Unfortunately, as it turns out, that woman and her merry gang have been hunting down Joel specifically, and after luring him into a trap, she slowly beats him to death with a golf club. All the while, Ellie helplessly watches and vows revenge.
Joel, please get up!
Nice birdie! Very well played!
Thus is the catalyst for the plot. Normally, that's where I would leave the plot summary, but I feel like it's important to go over how poorly the story is handled. As Ellie travels around Seattle hunting down Joel's killers, you learn little by little of their reasoning and their stance on the matter. It takes a good while to get to the big plot twist, but basically, Abby is the daughter of Jerry, the doctor that Joel shoots at the end of the first game. And Abby's friends also looked up to him, which lead them all to seek revenge on Joel. So it's a story of two daughters taking revenge on each other for the death of their fathers. Okay, that's fine, but it's always a pet peeve of mine when the sequel for a story is reliant on an important plot point that acts as if it was always brewing in the background, but it was clearly made up out of nowhere. Uncharted 3 did this even worse when it's revealed that Nathan Drake's otherwise innocuous ring turns out to be the key to opening an ancient treasure all of a sudden. And then Uncharted 4 features Nathan's brother who was never mentioned before once. It's very lazy writing, and Last of Us 2 goes in a similar direction. Abby is presented as a psychotic villain. It's already a bit absurd that she turns on her life savior in an instant without so much as a conversation, and especially after Joel presents himself as a normal and well-mannered dude. But Abby wants none of it, and her friends, as it turns out, they aren't much better.
Where's Abby?
You still hear his screams?
What?
I hear them every night. Yeah, that little bitch got what he deserved.
Fucking Trespasser! Somebody, please!
So I'm thinking, alright, sure, the zombie apocalypse has a way of making people crazy, and I'm not against a more black and white story with a clear antagonist, so why not? I'm fine with the motivation too. If Abby wants blind, rage-fueled revenge for the death of her father, then hey, I'm all for it. But the stupidity goes into full force at the halfway point. That's when the story restarts, and we go over the previous 3 days again, but do so from Abby's point of view. One of the first things shown at this point is Abby walking by a classroom full of happy children. Really? Could it possibly be more on the nose? Wow, how dare you hate this complete monster? Can't you see she has a heart of gold? After all, she's part of this wonderful group of people that are doing such good things. I bet you sure feel like a fool now, huh? We see this constantly. Abby is shown to be some fantastic person who's willing to go above and beyond to sacrifice herself for others. She has friends she cares about, who Ellie kills one by one, and then we're supposed to feel bad about it in retrospect? Please, I'm not falling for your cheap tricks. The craziest part comes when two members from a rival faction, the Seraphites, rescue Abby just moments before death. And the three of them work together to escape a horde of oncoming zombies. Which is an extremely similar scenario between Joel and Abby, and we all know how that turned out. Of course, Abby doesn't hate these two personally, so in the end, they all go their separate ways. That's fine for a small little side story, but then Abby later goes out of her way to rescue them. And I mean, really goes out of her way and constantly puts herself in serious danger for the sake of complete strangers. She's even willing to directly go against her squad, who she was perfectly fine with just a day or two ago, and now she's just gonna murder them all? It's not like there was this big twist where she decides that WLF is evil now. Abby just has this sudden change of heart. And just because the story itself calls this out doesn't excuse the poor writing.
I may fall for your little act with these kids, but I don't. There's nothing to fall for. Isaac's top scar killer suddenly had a change of heart. Nothing to do with Owen, right? I haven't always done the right thing. You're a piece of shit, Abby. You always have been.
The main explanation is that they're just kids and they don't deserve the situation they found themselves in. Okay, but I mean, really? You're going to abandon your entire life for this? But you know what? Sure. Let's go ahead and say that she is willing to do this. This is still the same character who murdered Joel just minutes after her life was saved by him.
Please get up.
That's a hole-in-one!
And she doesn't care to even attempt to offer an explanation. Somehow, this is the same character. Yeah, I'm not buying it.
Just let him go. You killed my friends. We let you both live. And you wasted it.
I mean, it's like these characters are talking past one another rather than at each other. They don't realize the irony in their own words. Maybe that's the point, that these characters are blinded by hatred. But so much of the story is based around this idea of perspective. That the person you hate isn't who you think they are. That everyone has their own lives and backgrounds that have led them to this point. That's not a revelation, and it sure as hell isn't deep storytelling. It's funny that this game is rated M for mature audiences because the writing is on a teenage level. And I wouldn't care so much about this, but the story is so pretentious and it never lets up with this stuff. It goes on and on and on. If you're going to make human characters with deep characterization and believable personalities, then you gotta do it right. But that's not what writer and director Neil Druckmann was interested in doing when he wrote the story. He wanted to show off a Saturday morning cartoon villain, and then, surprise, he pulls the rug out from under you. Ha! It turns out she wasn't such a bad guy after all. I don't find that kind of storytelling to be enjoyable, and it's a problem when the story is as involved as it is with Last of Us 2. It also doesn't help that, at the end of the game, the moral of the story is that revenge isn't worth it. despite the fact that without revenge, none of this would have happened anyway. There wouldn't be a game. Druckmann wants to have his cake and eat it too. There's plenty of other goofy stuff with the individual character moments. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the whole bigot sandwich scene.
What you got there?
Bigot sandwiches.
Smells good.
I want to read this moment in a more interesting way, because you have Seth being a jerk from the night before trying to make amends. And at the least, he appears to be sincere about it. At the same time, Maria is doing her best to mend the situation and have everyone get along. However, Ellie isn't having any of it. She dismisses Seth and refuses his apology, which does play into her character of being stupid and irrational. Which is good, she's only 18 years old after all. It makes sense for her to act a little bit immature, angsty. She has some flaws, she's a real human being. However, for the sake of telling a good story, there's never a callback to this. Ellie never grows, she never learns anything, and considering how poor the storytelling is in other areas, I wouldn't be surprised if the real intention was just to have Ellie totally own Seth in this epic moment, guys. Other parts can be a bit of a hit and miss. They make a big deal about Dina being Jewish and her ancestry coming from a long line of survivors. Sure, it's a little on the nose, but at least it does support the character in the setting. But then you have a major part of Lev's backstory being that he's transgender, and I don't know how the hell to take that.
I heard some of your people calling him Lily.
For a long time, I didn't understand why he was questioning the laws, the traditions. When he explained to me how he felt inside, I told him he had to keep it to himself. I was hoping he'd snap out of it. He seemed fine for a while.
The story would have been perfectly fine otherwise. You say that Lev didn't want to be put in an arranged marriage with one of the village elders, and that's why he ran away from home. That's plenty good enough. The whole transgender aspect feels so shoehorned in and out of place in a zombie apocalypse. We're supposed to be struggling for food, medicine, shelter. Civilization has completely collapsed, and it's very well possible that, aside from specific settlements, humanity on the whole might be on the brink of extinction here. I think that personal and sexual identity can take a little bit of a back seat. It kind of undermines the other themes of the setting when this is what we're worried about. I'm not trying to come off as offensive. I'm just saying that sexual identity is a rather silly topic to cover in the middle of the apocalypse, alright? That's all I'm saying. Honestly, it's about as silly as bigotry being a major concern when a horde of zombies or bandits could potentially destroy your settlement.
Bigot sandwiches.
But hey, I guess these are the topics that Druckmann wants to explore, and he chose a hell of a setting to do it in. Then, to top it all off, you have that image of Abby literally willing to take a gunshot for Lev from the gruff military guys who won't listen to reason. A bunch of this feels like it's pandering to specific demographics and nailing bullet points to shoot for awards on the grounds of being progressive, rather than focusing on telling a good story, which is what the first game did. Like I said in the previous review, it wasn't anything amazing, but it was at least okay, and it didn't get in the way too much. It felt like the combat, puzzles, exploration, and story all got an equal amount of time in the game. With the sequel, on the other hand, so much attention was given to the storytelling that the other aspects were squeezed down. Some people like to throw around the term movie game as to say that a game has very little gameplay, Obviously, the David Cage games are a popular choice, and rightfully so, but something like Ghost of Tsushima arguably does blur the line a little bit more. While it does have a lot of cutscenes, I think the pacing is a lot more effective, so I wouldn't say that it necessarily counts there. With The Last of Us 2, yeah, I really think this is a movie game. It happens more than once that you can go half an hour or more without any meaningful gameplay. And the vast majority of that time is taken up by cutscenes or walk and talk. And that's just about it. That's my big problem with the game. The story sucks and it takes up way too much time. Admittedly, it does have its enjoyable moments. The flashback of Ellie visiting a dinosaur museum had a lot of fun dialogue, even if that part hardly had any gameplay at all. And the cover of Take On Me that Ellie plays on her guitar was an unexpected and pleasant surprise.
Needless to say, I'm odds and ends, but I'll be stumbling away, slowly learning that life is okay. Say after me, it's no better to be safe than sorry. Take on.
But even at its best, these are the rare standout moments. The majority blows, and there's so much of it. A ton of this stuff should have been cut down or cut out entirely. As for the other bits of the presentation, I gotta give credit where credit is due. This is a very beautiful looking game. The recent Resident Evil remakes and Devil May Cry 5 are still the best looking games I've played on the PlayStation 4, with Final Fantasy VII Remake trailing behind. And I'd say that Last of Us 2 is just about as good. The facial expressions, which tends to be a Naughty Dog specialty, are excellent here. The way that Ellie looks pissed off and strained when she's performing a stealth kill on someone looks so good. And just your basic animations in general are great. As with the first game, the environments are top notch. The areas taken over by the cordyceps fungus are just as haunting, and the nature reclaimed cityscapes are as cool as the first game. Most of the game is a bit samey from the first one, but there are a couple of interesting areas to explore that are unique to this sequel. It might be a boring as hell game to play most of the time, but at least it does look good. That leaves us with the gameplay. Much of it remains the same, such as gathering supplies and crafting weapons and items. Not a whole lot is different here, although it is neat that both Ellie and Abby get their own set of weapons and items, which in turn leads to different approaches for combat. Ellie's indestructible switchblade allows her to perform stealth kills far more efficiently and quickly, while Abby needs to craft breakable shivs to do the same, much like what Joel had to do in the first game. Weapon upgrades return, and it's both more streamlined and more impactful than it was in the first game. I think I like the weapon upgrades better in the sequel, although the character upgrades, which are back too, these have been changed to have a skill tree system, which is annoying since you have to buy some lackluster abilities first to get to the good stuff. Still, it's all well done enough, and it provides a small semblance of customization and playstyle. With the core of the gameplay, it remains a stealth action game, and this time it's even more similar to Metal Gear Solid, now with the ability to go prone and hide in tall grass, and even under furniture. A lot of improvements were made, and thankfully so, as it wasn't anything special in the first game. The number one thing is that the AI is a lot more believable and realistic. When you get caught, it actually makes sense when it happens. Now, you still do get some nonsense moments. I don't believe this zombie on the other side of this window here should have seen me. There are also times when the developers intentionally lay a trap, forcing the player to get caught if they stealth kill a specific zombie, and this begins an otherwise unintended combat segment. However, these moments are a lot more rare, and for the most part, the game doesn't need to use underhanded tricks to create tension. The AI does that just fine on its own. Human enemies are the big draw here. They start off with the usual patrol routes, but once they stumble upon a dead body or otherwise see something unusual, they'll communicate with others within yelling distance and slowly expand their search radius. It's probably not as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be in comparison to the competition, but it really is a drastic improvement over the first game. As long as you use cover and tall grass to your advantage, it's not very difficult for the enemy to lose track of you, which is very reminiscent of Metal Gear Solid's normal, alert, and caution phases. All of this alone would be enough to impress me, but the new enemies added to the game advance this further. The new zombie, called a Shambler, isn't anything too special, it's just another variation on the typical combat zombie. The dogs, on the other hand, add another layer of depth and complexity to what would otherwise be a more simplistic game. Dogs are able to track the player via scent, and while it is silly that a scent trail can be visualized, the whole thing does come together rather well. You can't simply hide out in a room and wait for a soldier to pass by because the dog might sniff you out. By the same token, killing a dog before killing the caretaker will put people on alert, but not the other way around, meaning it's much more advantageous to kill the caretaker first and then immediately take out the dog. If the enemy is closing in on you, you can also give them a hard time by taking unconventional paths and creating a large gap between you, but it all needs to be done quietly. Speaking of which, this is further supported by the enhanced level design. More verticality is used this time, meaning that enemies can be above or below you, and maps in general are much larger. Unexpected reinforcements will still load in on occasion, but it's generally more fair overall. The AI might be less omniscient, but they're not exactly stupid either. If you fire upon an enemy from stealth and another ally sees it happen, then they don't magically know where you are immediately, but they do take an educated guess and start to home in on your location slowly, which you can, again, make use of the environment to throw them off.
Sean! We're under attack! They came from back there!
Who the fuck's out there? Search this whole goddamn area! Mila! It came from over there! Quick! We need to stop this now!
They even went so far as to add a simple dodge and counterattack mechanic for melee weapons. And while it's nothing special, it does add a lot more consistency to close quarters combat, which, in the first game, typically meant that you were guaranteed to take some small damage before you managed to land your first hit, so melee weapons are much more useful this time around. With all this praise, I've certainly painted a pretty picture of how good the gameplay is this time, and some of you might be wondering why I opened this video with such a doom and gloom attitude. After all, anyone who knows me knows that I'm the kind of guy who's willing to look past a bad story as long as the gameplay is good. The problem here is twofold. While Last of Us 2 can be an excellent game at its best, it rarely is at its best. The majority of the combat scenarios involve pretty much scripted setups where enemies are lined up and basically asking to be killed. There are quite a few of these cannon fodder segments, and while it is still fun to examine and expose enemy patrol routes, it's hardly that big of a deal, and it feels more like filler than anything else. The parts of the game where actual effort was put in are few and far between, and it hurts doubly so when you see what the game is actually capable of. The second aspect is, again, the overall pacing of the game and the way the story is presented. I can look past a bad story, but not when the story is also taking up half of my time or more. Between cutscenes, general dialogue, and aimlessly wandering around and exploring, I've gone well over an hour sometimes before any real gameplay happens. And that's the fatal flaw with Last of Us 2. This game could have been legitimately great, but they put so much stock into the story, which, on top of not being that good, is extremely ham-fisted as well. It tries so hard to hammer in its themes and make the player care about these characters and the world they live in, that it actually ended up having the opposite effect on me. I just grew numb and stopped caring about where the story was going anymore. But even that doesn't excuse the disappointing ending. It's not a bad game, there is a lot I like here, but what's good is buried under tons of garbage, and it's just not worth it. Thanks for watching my review on The Last of Us Part 2. And special thanks to both One Doom Game Critic and Recommended Playing for loaning me this game. Both of them have done excellent video game reviews themselves, and I encourage you to check them out as well.